The story of Yefim Abelevich Golbraikht, Senior Lieutenant of the Guards, Battalion Commissar, and Commander of a penal company. A man who endured the Sivash Bridgehead, the assault on Sapun Mountain, and Stalingrad. Awarded the Order of the Red Star and combat medals. I was born in 1921 in Vitebsk. My father was a complex man. Before the revolution, he was part of the combat organization of the Socialist Revolutionary Party. But after 1917, he stepped away from political activity and worked as an ordinary clerk. Our family led a typical, working-class life until everything changed in 1937. That fall, my father was arrested. A week later, after his second interrogation, the special conference issued its verdict. He was sentenced to death. The sentence was carried out in January 1938. I only learned of it years later. Back then, we received only a standard, chilling notice. Sentenced to 10 years without the right to correspondence. In an instant, I went from being a patriotic Komsomol member to an outcast branded as the son of an enemy of the people. Of my 30 classmates, 8 had at least one parent arrested. My friend Vanya Sukov had both his mother and father taken away. Our family wasn't exiled, and I wasn't expelled from school. I finished 10 years of schooling and got a job as an instructor at a children's technical station. But deep inside, a sense of resentment and injustice took root in me forever. Fate had already made me a stranger among my own people. After finishing school, I worked as an instructor at the technical station. Life seemed to go on, but the shadow of my father's past followed me. When it was time for conscription, I wasn't drafted. I was placed in the second category reserve, meaning I couldn't be trusted with a weapon, even in wartime. Naively, I applied to the Higher Naval Academy. I remember the military commissar shaking his head sadly as he accepted my application without a word. Too much about me was wrong, and I knew it. By the start of the war, my friends were already serving in the regular army. I stayed home, working and studying in my first year at the Physics and Mathematics Department of the Vitebsk Pedagogical Institute. I wanted to be useful, to stand shoulder to shoulder with others, but my desires meant little. I felt that despite my efforts to live a normal life, my father's past would always stand between me and my future. Still, I kept studying, trying to believe there would be a place for me someday. When the war began, I immediately went to the military enlistment office. They told me, "Wait for your summons, we haven't forgotten you." Along with other institute students, I was assigned to a militia battalion. We were given old Belgian rifles without bayonets and sent to patrol the streets. A week later, we were ordered to turn in our weapons, and the battalion was disbanded. On July 3, 1941, I heard Stalin's address to the nation. For the first time, it became clear that the war would be long and brutal. Streams of refugees poured through the city. On July 8th, I saw my mother, younger sister, and brother off at the train station. A passenger train guarded by Red Army soldiers stood there, and in the square nearby waited the families of Army commanders. They were loaded onto the train, but it was off limits to others. Suddenly, an older major I didn't know appeared, took our belongings, and told us to follow him. He led us past the guards, pushed my family into a carriage, and ordered them to stay put. I never learned his name, but that noble man saved my family from certain death. My mother prayed for him until her last day. I returned home, paid the rent and electricity, returned my library books, gathered my few belongings, and went back to the enlistment office. But it was empty. Everyone had fled. The division headquarters in the city was deserted too. The next day, the Germans bombed Vitebsk. For the first time, I saw dead women and children on the pavement. The city was burning. Bridges, the power station, shop windows shattered by explosions. German tanks rolled into the streets. I saw a peasant cart pull into the square. Women looters, their faces a mix of shame and thrill. There was no defense. Only on the city's outskirts did I spot a machine gun and Senior Lieutenant Sukotsky, our military training instructor, shouting, "We'll meet them!" Beside him stood a young soldier, looking at him with pleading eyes. One machine gun against tanks. Before the war, Vitebsk had a population of nearly 180,000. When it was liberated in 1944, only a few hundred remained. I headed east with the flow of people. The most horrific sight was hundreds of men in civilian clothes walking toward the front. These weren't refugees. They were deserters, openly heading home, leaving the war behind. I walked with two Komsomol members from Grodno, but soon they too gave up and went home. German planes circled overhead, dropping leaflets. Moscow has fallen, the Red Army is defeated, kill the commissars and Jews. Many began to believe these words. Along the way, I met a Jewish family, a mother, father, and 3 children. The eldest son was about 17. I convinced the parents to let him come with me. After the war, I met him again. He had fought, been wounded several times, and earned medals, but his parents and younger siblings were shot in a ghetto. Food was scarce. We ate wild strawberries, and sometimes kind villagers gave us bread. My boots fell apart, and I walked barefoot until an old man gave me a pair of bass shoes. In this state, I reached the Artsevo district. There was no solid front line there, and I saw a division from the Far East unloading. The soldiers were well-equipped and armed, an impressive sight. I tried to enlist with them, but the head of the special department, an older man, said, "Go on, son, you'll get your chance." In those bass shoes, I made it to Moscow, to my mother's relatives. At the enlistment office, commanders surrounded me, asking about my journey and the situation. Someone reported me, and within half an hour, NKVD officers took me away. At their station, I recounted everything I had seen. They were decent people. They let me go, warning me not to tell anyone else what I'd witnessed. I returned to the institute, was enrolled in my 2nd year, and got a spot in the dormitory. Soon the dorm was repurposed for forming partisan units, and we were moved to another building. But only those without relatives in occupied territories were accepted there. So I didn't become a partisan. The enlistment office kept saying, "Wait, we'll call you." They finally did in the spring of 1942. On the night of October 14th of 15, the front near Moscow was breached. I heard Levitan on the radio mistakenly say, "This is Kuibyshev," instead of, "This is Moscow." That slip caused a wave of panic. Factory bosses hurriedly loaded their families onto trucks and fled the capital. The city descended into chaos. People looted stores, and drunks roamed the streets, draped in sausages and clutching rolls of fabric. But what shocked me most were the lines at women's hairdressers, as if they were preparing to welcome the Germans. The intellectuals in hats vanished from the streets, and the rabble felt like they owned the place. Even private cafes appeared. Rumors spread that Stalin had fled with the government. I didn't believe it, but later I read Malenkov's memoirs, which claimed Stalin was absent from Moscow for 10 days. The areas around train stations were packed with thousands of people and vehicles. Tens of thousands moved along the Enthusiast Highway, heading east to escape the city. It was pure panic. But on October 17th, the authorities regained control. The city saw reinforced patrols and volunteer communist divisions began forming. Under red banners, elderly men, 17-year-old boys, and even bespectacled intellectuals, previously unfit for service, stood to defend Moscow. They went into battle with old rifles and hunting shotguns. These civilians stood firm for the capital. On May 2nd, 1942, I was finally drafted. As soon as I stepped into the enlistment office, the commissar started asking, "Student, what faculty, tanks or artillery?" There was a popular notion that educated Jews were ideal for technical branches. Without waiting for my answers, the commission chairman decided, "You'll be a tanker." I was sent to Kazan to the 24th Reserve Tank Training Regiment, where they trained radio gunners. The training tanks were British Valentines, painted a dirty yellow meant for desert warfare. I particularly remember the heavy Bren machine gun, weighing about 20 kilograms. During an alert, I was supposed to grab that club and charge into battle as if in infantry. A week before being sent to the front, the regiment's commissar approached me and said, "We've chosen you as the Komsomol organizer. Prepare to give a speech." I honestly admitted that my father had been convicted as an enemy of the people. The commissar's face went pale. He turned and left without a word. That same day, I was summoned and transferred to a reserve rifle regiment in Sustlanger, in the II USSR. Sustlanger was a trial of its own. Dugouts housed entire companies, with 2-tier bunks and bedding made of fir branches. The area was surrounded by forest and swarms of mosquitoes. Most soldiers were semi-literate conscripts from remote taiga villages. Training consisted of marching on the parade ground with wooden sticks instead of rifles. We had no real weapons. We were given 600 grams of sticky bread daily, and the soup was so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl. You had to drink it from the edge. The battalion commander, an older reservist, offered me a job as a clerk for the rest of the war. I refused. On the 9th day in Stalingrad, I was sent with a marching company straight to the front. I ended up near Stalingrad in the Don Steppes in the 594th Rifle Regiment of the 207th Division. We held defenses northwest of the city. The fighting was so bloody that after a week on the front line, I couldn't believe I was still alive and unwounded. My career progressed rapidly. On the 3rd day, I was commanding a squad of 4 soldiers. The rest had been killed or wounded. A couple of weeks later, I was a sergeant. Sometimes it was so grueling that death seemed like a release. Bombings went on almost around the clock. People lost their minds from the strain. The worst was cluster bombing. A huge cylinder would open, and dozens of small bombs rained down in a swarm. The sky became a solid scream. You'd lie there, thinking only of dying quickly, without suffering. I remember one combat day in the summer of 1942. We were at junction number 564 near a train of burned-out T-34 tanks. No one knew what had happened there, but the sight was horrific. That morning we went on the attack, supported by tanks and even Katyusha rockets, which felt incredible at the time. We pushed the Germans back a kilometer. It came to bayonet fighting. A shard grazed my lip, and only later did I realize why blood was dripping from my face. Our tank got tangled in communication wire. 2 signalmen were sent to fix it. Both were killed by a sniper. The regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Kudale, looked at me and said, "Komsomol, lead by example." My last name was hard for many to pronounce, so they just called me Komsomol. I crawled to the tank, lying next to the dead signalman, clamped the wire in my teeth, and restored the connection. Commissar Dinin, an older man who had volunteered for the rifle regiment, waved to me, and at that moment a sniper killed him. I miraculously survived. Later, back in the trenches, I heard the order, "Sergeant Golbraikht is appointed Battalion Commissar." They handed me a mess tin of macaroni with stew, but then an artillery barrage began. I covered the food with my body to keep dirt out of it. A shell hit the trench of the artillery observers nearby. They all died. Even in the hell of war, there were strange moments where life broke through. I saw a soldier from Central Asia heat his mess tin of porridge on a smoldering tank. There was something profoundly human in that calm determination. On the front, I learned what it meant to lead soldiers into an attack by example. It was always a test of will. When every instinct screams to burrow deeper into the ground and disappear, you have to stand up first and move forward. Stand tall under machine gun fire when death is literally searching for you. Take a step while your comrades are still pressed to the earth. You realize this might be the last sky you see, but you stand up anyway, because it's what's needed. The losses were horrific. Sometimes entire battalions were reduced to a handful of men. Sergeants commanded companies and lieutenant colonels led divisions. A regiment could shrink to a weary few. I saw our battalion receive replacements. Young guys from Central Asia who barely spoke Russian. Officers would say in despair, "I'd trade 10 Uzbeks for 1 Russian soldier." But that was the face of war. Everyone went into battle, no matter who they were. In November 1942, I took part in crossing the Don near the Malokletsky farmstead. It was the start of the encirclement of Paulus's army. We fought through snow, facing Manstein's tanks breaking through to the surrounded forces. They crushed us with their tracks, forcing us to retreat across white fields. I was left with a group of 10 soldiers, armed with a pistol, while the others had rifles without grenades. Lying in the snow meant freezing to death. We pretended to be dead, and the Germans passed by. But when one got too close, a comrade's nerves broke, and he fired. Chaos erupted, they spotted us, and we ran. We fled like never before, somehow reaching our own lines. In those moments I understood. Life hung by a thread, and a miracle wasn't a grand word, but the very fact of surviving each battle. Losses were so heavy that sometimes a senior lieutenant commanded a regiment, and a lieutenant colonel led a division. Few survived. New soldiers arrived, only to vanish quickly in the fire of battle. Everything melted away before our eyes. On November 19, 1942, I took part in the Don Crossing, the start of Paulus's encirclement. The fighting was brutal, especially in December, when Manstein's tanks broke through our defenses to reach the surrounded forces. They crushed us with armor, and we ran through the snow, seeking salvation near artillery guns. But the guns had only 3 shells each, with orders to fire only at point-blank range. The Germans outflanked us, and by evening, I was left with 10 men. I had 1 cube in my collar tabs by then, and the soldier said, "Lead us, junior lieutenant. Get us to our own." We lay in the snow near a road with German vehicles, surrounded by enemies. We knew it was the end, death or capture. I told the men, if they take us, don't say I'm Jewish. There was no reply, but their silence was a promise. When a German came close, rummaging through the pockets of the dead, one of our soldiers fired, sparking a firefight. We ran with all we had and, miraculously, broke through to a village where we found our own. In 1943, I was commanding a company in the 999th Rifle Regiment. I hadn't attended any officer school, but after a year on the front, fear was gone. My company rarely had more than 40 men, and a commander's life was short. I was lucky. I lasted several months before being taken out of action. Then came a concussion, a hospital in Shakti, and typhus. I returned to the front and joined the 884th Regiment of the 267th Division. Commanding a company without formal training was tough. I didn't consider myself an ideal commander. But on the battlefield, it wasn't about words. It was about whether you were ready to lead the way. And the soldiers followed those who stood up first. The fighting on the Mias front was especially brutal. Our division held a rare section where the left bank of the river was higher than the right, occupied by the Germans. This gave us an advantage. Our machine gunners kept the enemy in their sights, controlling their every move. But in return, the Germans unleashed a storm of bombings and artillery fire. Losses were heavy, even in defense. We constantly needed replacements. The regiment commander cursed, "You report a full company, but there's no one to fight." Still, he promised to send men. That evening, as darkness fell, a chain of 8 soldiers approached. Their gait showed they were older men, around 50, toothless, soaking dry bread in porridge. They could barely stand. One of them stood out. He limped heavily. I asked, "Are you wounded?" He replied, "No. One leg's been 7 centimeters shorter since childhood." I was stunned. "How did they draft you?" He shrugged. "They just did. I've been sent from Siberia. Everywhere they ask, then pass me on, saying, they'll sort it out there. So here I am." There was nowhere else to go, the front line. Young or old, crippled or not, everyone faced the same fate, to fight. We took up positions on the Sivash Bridgehead, between Lake Igul and the Sivash itself. For months, we endured constant shelling and bombings. The 3-kilometer crossing was under fire day and night, with supplies and evacuation of the wounded possible only at night, always under attack. On April 7, 1944, we were ordered to conduct a reconnaissance in force. I went into the attack with the regiment's Komsomol organizer, Sasha Kislichko. We came under artillery fire, and I was buried under earth. I was pinned and couldn't get out. Kislichko saw my cap above the surface and started digging. He got me out up to my shoulders, but another salvo buried me again. A deafened starshina stepped on my head as he passed, not hearing my cries. Only the regiment's party organizer, Nechitailo, and Sergeant Sidorenko pulled me out alive. Kislichko died. They found him buried, lifeless. We pushed forward and took a height. What was meant as reconnaissance turned into a full assault. We held it with 2 45mm gun crews and a handful of soldiers. The Germans threw 4 tanks and hundreds of infantry at us. 1 gun was destroyed immediately. I fired a captured machine gun, though its recoil knocked me back. We held until night, when our forces broke through to us. Few survived, and no one was decorated for that fight. Later came the assault on Sapun Mountain. The Germans were entrenched, with Crimean Tatars fighting alongside them. Our Lieutenant Muratov, hearing familiar curses from the enemy trenches, stood up and charged forward, shouting his final words before falling. The banner was carried by party organizer Smelovich, then Yatsunenko after Smelovich was killed. We took Sapun Mountain at a horrific cost. I slid down the slope and reported to the battalion commander. "The banner is raised, but foolishly added, there's another one a kilometer away." Those words cost me. Ivashchuk, the battalion commander, believed my report cost him a Hero of the Soviet Union title. I received only the Order of the Red Star for Sevastopol. The question of who raised the banner first was debated for years. I volunteered for the penal company. A soldier doesn't choose his fate, but joining a penal unit required consent. I knew there wasn't much difference between a regular rifle company and a penal one. Both went on reconnaissance in force. Both broke through defenses. The difference was the soldiers. Ordinary men in one, offenders in the other. Penal companies were formed under Stalin's not a step-back order. Each army had 3. The roster changed constantly. New men arrived daily for cowardice, insubordination, desertion, fighting, or just because someone higher up didn't like them. There were criminals, simple peasants, and those unfairly condemned. The term of service was calculated uniquely. 3 to 4 years of prison equaled 1 month in a penal company, up to 7 years meant 2 months, and up to 10 years meant 3. But most were released due to wounds. A wound meant atonement. Sometimes heroism earned early release. We lived apart. No political officers, no Komsomol meetings, no fuss over leaflets or collar linings. Our full name was Separate Army Penal Company, and separate meant a lot. We reported directly to the division, with no one meddling from above. Even supplies came straight from army warehouses. Food, vodka, and uniforms arrived without theft, so we were fed better than regular companies. The Starshina brought us sheepskin coats and decent uniforms. Soldiers joked that life in a penal company was better than in a regular one. But there was no romance in it. Desertion happened even among us. A few fled near the war's end, costing us award citations and delayed promotions. Still, the main difference was that every day could be your last, and no one hid it. I knew that as the son of an enemy of the people, I had no other path but a rifle company or a penal one. I chose it myself, knowing it was a one-way road. Not all penal soldiers rushed into battle, as some believe. Sometimes attacks stalled, and men lay among the dead and wounded. The company commander and I would go back, finding whole groups hiding in trenches. In those moments, we had to drive them forward with threats firing over their heads. I'm amazed now that I did it, but back then, there was no other way. Every soldier counted. Our treatment of prisoners was harsh. In the heat of battle, a German raising his hands might be shot on the spot. But after a fight, if he surrendered, he often lived. When 20 surrendered at once, they were usually spared. But if a company was down to 20 men and took 8 prisoners, there weren't enough to escort them. The commander would give the order, and it was over quickly. Vlasovites were always killed. Rear line and staff troops often dealt with prisoners even more swiftly. Sometimes we had to guard Romanian prisoners from second echelon heroes who'd kill them en route. In our penal company on the front line, everyone had personal scores to settle. Many had lost families, homes, loved ones. The political officers' calls for humanity rang hollow. I saw horrific scenes. When the Germans captured our hospital near Shaliai, they threw the wounded out of windows. We watched through binoculars, powerless. After such sights, there was no mercy for prisoners. Revenge was natural. But some moments still haunt me. A man once defected to us, unarmed in tattered civilian clothes with no documents. He spoke neither Russian nor German, likely a Latvian or Estonian. He could have been sent back, but that meant assigning an escort. It was easier to shoot him. I tried to defend him, but my superiors cursed me, saying, "Why pity them? They're wiping out your people." That was war. You balanced duty, hatred, and the struggle to hold on to whatever humanity remained. Over the years, I've seen how books and films distort the truth about penal units and blocking detachments. Movies show hordes charging with machine gun-wielding blocking units behind them, commanded by former convicts. It's all fiction. Blocking detachments never stood behind us. They were at checkpoints and roads catching deserters. They were regular units, not punishers in shiny helmets and new coats, as films depict. Movies love showing penal units on reconnaissance, as if it happened constantly. But who'd risk sending men, half of whom might end up captured, on such missions? The special officers would accuse the commander of aiding the enemy. It just didn't happen. The lies pile up. Officers keeping their ranks serving in penal companies. Criminals in penal battalions. Women alongside penal soldiers in villages. All false. In reality, officers went to officer-only penal battalions after tribunals. Criminals went to penal companies. Women were never sent to us. Their fate was prison or labor camps. Even a light wound meant a penal soldier's term was served. No one was sent back. There were no pre-battle blessings. No priests stood before penal units in some theatrical display. The Red Army was starkly simple, with no religious ceremonies. Penal soldiers weren't made commanders. Company and battalion commanders were career officers, though a penal soldier could become a platoon leader. Small lies breed distrust in the bigger truth. When I watch these works, I see only a distortion of the memory of those who fought and died. The real life of a penal company was grim and heavy, nothing like what screenwriters depict. By the war's end, our penal company had few soldiers left. Many were wounded and sent to reserve regiments. Others atoned and returned to regular units. Release was simple. The commander submitted lists of those who fought bravely. Soldiers turned in their weapons to the Starshina and were reassigned to nearby regiments. No tribunals or hearings, just decisions made on the spot. For me, the penal company was both a trial and, in a way, my fate. I knew the son of an enemy of the people had no other path. But even here, I saw people differently. Some sought redemption, some just survival, others were broken beyond repair. We shared everything: food, dirt, fear, despair, and rare moments of joy. I often think of those who didn't survive, those we buried on the front lines, left in shell craters and trenches. I remember Commissar Dynan, killed beside me. I remember Sasha Kislichko, who dug me out from under the earth but died in that moment. I always wonder, if he hadn't tried to save me, maybe he'd have lived. That thought haunts me. By the war's end, bitterness reached its peak. We took fewer prisoners. People burned with vengeance. We'd seen too many ruined homes, murdered children, and mangled soldiers. Forgiveness was impossible. When it was over, I knew those who returned faced a new life, but the memories would always be blood, mud, and loss. I survived, though the odds were slim. Now my duty is to remember those who fell, who fought beside me. I went from a student, the son of an enemy of the people, to a commander, commissar, and penal soldier. My only conclusion: war isn't about heroism or glory. It's a daily struggle for survival. Every step was a test, every breath a gift of fate.